Zero carbon.
East-Top.
Hello and welcome to Zero Carbonista Series 5, Just Stop the Tories. I'm Ian Collins and this is part 2 of the WOMAD special, Europe's biggest arts festival, tens of thousands of people over 3 days in attendance. And this was the Q&A section from the audience. It is worth just visiting one point that comes up a lot that is used whenever we've done phone-ins together. The man that doesn't like windmills will always call in with the gotcha moment. And the gotcha moment goes something like this. So you have to imagine the caller on the other end, his flaring nostrils of indignation. He's finally been put through to talk to Dale Vince, who's waxing lyrical about environmental policies, changing the way we live, saving the planet, wildlife, nature, the things we eat, etc. And Flaming Nostril Man is ready with this question that's going to stop you in your tracks, Dale.
I can't wait.
You ready? Hello, Mr. Vince. It always starts like that. It's never Dale. What about the Chinese? Every time. That's it. Gotcha. Done. Done deal. What about the Chinese?
Yeah, I mean...
Come on then. Answer the question.
China, yeah.
What about the China? They're burning more nonsense than anyone else. Blah, blah, blah. The list goes on.
I know.
You're familiar with the question. I mean, what is the answer?
It's a brilliant question. I just want to say there are a couple others as well. You remind me, because I was on with Piers Morgan a while ago, and he brought some of this stuff up. And I do quite a bit of right-wing radio and TV, and I do it precisely to talk to, flaring nostril man, and people with normal nostrils as well, who just have genuine, genuine questions and concerns and disbeliefs about the possibility of everything. First thing is, we have enough wind and sun to power the whole country 10 or 20 times over, right? Because the first thing they say is there's not enough. Well, There is, right? By 10 or 20 times. Second thing they say is there's not enough room. Well, we need 1% of the land area of Britain to do this. So that's my second answer. Destroys that myth. And then third thing is probably it'd be too expensive. And I say, but it's actually cheaper. It's like, okay, third myth shot down. And then we get to usually, what about China? It's a great example. I mean, it's amoral to say that, right? Actually, to believe that we shouldn't do something because somebody else may not be doing enough. That's just amoral. In this climate crisis, we've got to do everything that we can. And of course, we have no leadership role. Thank you. We have no leadership role internationally if we're not doing what we can do. And listen, we're the guys that started the Industrial Revolution. We began this whole climate crisis. We've got historical responsibility for this. But apart from that, China are leading the world. They've got 50% green electricity on their grid. They make 80% of all of the solar panels deployed anywhere in the world. They've got thousands of electric buses on the road. They're building wind and solar projects at an incredible rate. They're ahead of their own targets while we're behind our targets. And China simply is a country without whom we would find getting to net zero as a planet trillions of dollars more expensive. So, I mean, China are leading the way. China are actually a great example of what you need to do, right? They've got a different kind of political system to us, I would say, semi-autocratic, semi-free market. They set themselves long-term goals and they make it happen. And, the success of China is incredible. I think in 1 month this year, I saw a graph this week. In 1 month, I think it was May, China made more electricity from solar panels than most other countries in the world made in an entire year. By one country, which within a year, it was just slightly ahead of 1 month in China.
Wow.
Which is incredible. And so we hear a lot about China and coal-fired power stations and all that kind of stuff. But what we don't hear are the huge moves they're making on green energy. To me, they're a world leader in green energy, and we've got some catching up to do.
It should be said that whenever you've given variants of that answer to Flaming Nostril Man, it usually ends with him going, I don't believe you. And that's it.
Well, yeah. And
you cannot placate the man, Dale.
And I come back to my point, right? All of this stuff is too good to be true.
Yeah.
People don't want to believe it. They just don't want to believe it.
Listen, we're going to take some questions. We have Anthony somewhere. Now, in another example of new technology, Anthony, over there in the T-shirt, doesn't actually exist. He's an AI hologram. Powered by those batteries you're talking about, Dale. But if you've got a question you want to put to Dale, wait till Anthony gets to you. There's a hand going up. There's hands all over the place, actually. So, Anthony, where do you want to start? He's moving towards the centre ground. Question number one. If we can keep the questions nice and succinct so we can get through as many as possible. Thank you.
We've got our first Labour MP since 1951 in High Wycombe, having got rid of Brexit hardman, COVID denier, climate sceptic, Steve Baker. We really like the
fantastic.
sound of the rooftop revolution. How do we start a rooftop revolution in High Wycombe?
That's a good question. So we're doing two things. We're sharing this information with Labour, trying to persuade them that an issue for the Great British Energy Company, alongside trying to build offshore wind projects, alongside private businesses probably, and all the other things they've got in mind. I think this is a unique opportunity for Great British Energy because it's not being done. And Great British Energy could fund this. We could have a national program for that. That's what we need, not just a High Wycombe one or a Stroud one or that kind of stuff. Alongside that, we're just beginning a trial of 100 homes ourselves as Ecotricity to do the insulation, solar and battery thing in 100 homes, set that up and get data from it, get real life experience, again, to use to persuade Labour that this is the right thing to do. But if they don't, then we'll persuade private businesses to invest to make that happen. So I can't really tell you how to do it in High Wycombe, but I think the best thing we can all do is persuade Labour to do this.
Did you shed a tear when Steve walked the plank? No. He was in the news this week for, I can't remember what it was now. It was something completely against type. He was kind of getting involved in, so, like so many of them do, you know, when they're in the spotlight, they speak all hard, like hard man Steve Baker. And then when they're out the spotlight, it's almost like, well, I didn't really believe that stuff anyway. It's a curious world we're living in. It is with politics.
We actually had a hand in the sacking of Rees-Mogg. Actually, so I had a run-in with him on his TV show, and I found him the most incredible, ridiculous man. You know, I was talking about subsidies for fossil fuels, and he said there aren't any, and I said, but there are tax breaks in the North Sea. That's how Rosebank would get built. And he said tax breaks aren't subsidies. He told me to go, you know, to pay attention in class. Basically, he was very patronising, and it turns out he was Brexit minister when the UK passed legislation to replace EU legislation that said tax breaks were subsidies. And I'm like, what the f***? So we trolled him on social media and said, it's you that needs to pay attention, actually. And then somebody came along, Dan, I can't remember his second name now, my bad. And he said, look, I'm going to stand against Rees-Mogg. Will you fund me? I'm like, yes.
Oh, Jarvis, Dan Jarvis.
Yeah. No, it wasn't Dan Jarvis. He was the mayor of the Southwest. Norris, thank you.
Norris.
Yeah, I like to refer to him as Chuck Norris's brother, but that's just a joke of mine. He's a great guy, and he did it. He got rid of Rees-Mogg for us.
Another question. Anthony is on the prowl with the microphone of creative joy.
Hi, Dale. Can you say a little bit about where we're at in terms of green gas and rolling that out across the country?
Yeah, thank you. I will. So we built our first project last summer, and it's fair to say we've been having problems with it. It turns out it was badly built. The concept is fine, but we seem to have built the worst green gas facility that is perhaps imaginable. We're having to rebuild it. It's going to take a few months. We did make gas. It did work, but it didn't last. There were some fundamental problems in the way it was put together. That's a kind of long story. But the important big picture is we're getting ready to build the second one, and the third and the fourth, and there's plenty of scope for it. There's enough grass in our country already grown to make all of the gas we need to power our homes. And it stands as a complete stark opposite to the heat pump program, the idea that we should all have heat pumps. I'm not against heat pumps. I've got a heat pump. I had one 20 years ago. So I should say that I'm not against them, but I'm against the idea that it's the answer to how we decarbonize home heating across the board. We've done studies that show 20% of British homes can never have one, and another 20% need major intervention, like not just efficiency, like energy efficiency, but also a different heating system because the temperature of the water that comes out of a heat pump is lower. Anyway, the whole thing costed at £300 billion, throwing away tens of millions of appliances, scrapping the national gas grid, that kind of stuff. And our argument is all we have to do is change the gas that we put in the grid, because we can make gas from grass and just stick it in the national grid. So I still think there's great potential. I'm busy trying to persuade Labour that this is the biggest opportunity actually of the green economy, mostly because it's just not been seen. We've been looking at green electricity forever.
Is there anyone doing that anywhere?
Just us.
Yeah,
just us. I just wanted to add this because I love this thing. We've gone further with grass than that. And this is a vegan thing, right? If you've ever been in an argument with people that think we should eat meat or we're designed to eat meat or whatever, they'll fall back, like the China thing, they'll fall back on one thing. They'll say, but we can't eat grass, so we might as well let animals eat it. Right? I think that's wrong because we should rewild grassland, not feed it to animals. We've got a project going on now in a university. We have extracted protein from grass that's human edible, and we're taking out twice as much protein from any amount of grass that a cow can. And there's enough grass grown in our country to make twice the protein that we all eat every year. So we can be protein independent as well as energy independent. And we can eat grass. I know, and I love that.
I'm glad Flaming Nostril Man isn't here, because that would have just finished him off, wouldn't it? That would have been the end of that.
I can see the headlines, the right-wing headlines, kind of. Yeah.
We have another question. Yes, sir.
Right, I'm going to be quite provocative here. I've looked at solar panels, 12 to 15,000 pounds to install in my house with batteries. The feeding rate is the best from Octopus, is about 12p. So what's your detail? And the other thing, the gas, making grass from gas infrastructure, there's a cost. How do you transport the gas? How do you process it? Where do you store it? How do you feed it in? It sounds good, Dale. How do you do it?
Yeah, good. But firstly, on the issue of, so there is a cost for all of this, and some of it is individuals.
Yeah, I mean, solar panels have collapsed in price. It's quite incredible. The £15,000 you quote, I can't quite recognize it, but you did say with a battery as well, and that'll make a big difference. If you just want to put solar panels on your rooftop now, you're talking about a few £1,000s. You should be looking at a 10-year payback or something like that. We've been crunching the numbers for the national program of doing all of this. I would advise, you don't want my advice probably, but I would look at just solar panels, and I think you'll find the economics are quite different. Green gas, how do we do it? We build a green gas project in and amongst the land where we'll grow the grass, so that the grass only ever travels by tractor, not by road. And we also build them next to the gas main, as close as we can get it, so that we just extend that main and plumb in. We make the gas and we treat the gas at that site and pump it straight into the gas grid. We are closer probably to people that use gas than North Sea gas is. That gets pumped hundreds of miles. Our gas mills will be in and amongst people that use gas in homes in Britain. It's been thought through. It's a lovely concept, and the land that grows the grass becomes a nature habitat. So we get to do a bit of rewilding, make carbon neutral gas. The whole national program will create 160,000 jobs in the rural economy and put about 15 billion into that rural economy. And I think of that as a different kind of leveling up, not north to south, but urban to rural, which I think is really important. Farmers are struggling. They need a transition. This is a part of the green economy that they can take part in.
Okay, another question.
Hi, Dale. Another question about green gas. Sorry. Why the focus on grass, and why not on landfill, animal waste, human waste, sewage as a source of biomethane, rather than growing grass specifically to produce biomethane from, which could, or there might be habitats in the grass or something that you're...
That's a good point.
Yeah, so fair enough. We brought green gas to Britain in 2010, and at the time it was being made for us in Holland, I think it was, from sugar beet residue, crop residue, which seemed half decent. But we wanted to make it here in Britain. And when we looked, the choices were waste, as you say, landfill gas. There's not much of that available, actually. I mean, it is methane. You don't have to turn it into methane. It's been harnessed for 20 years in our country. So that's not actually available to us. But food waste, animal waste, for example, that's possible. It's a very small resource, relatively. And you have this problem that if you sign a contract for 20 years for food waste, you lock in wasteful practice. It's like same as if you take something let's say you want to waste to energy, burning rubbish to make electricity. When councils sign contracts for 20 years of waste, they have to produce that waste. It prevents recycling and waste reduction. So that's one problem. Energy crops is the other way to do it. Dedicated crops grown to make gas, but that's a monoculture. That's intensive agriculture. What we found with grass is we can grow it with no pesticides and no fertilizers. There's 100 million tons of grass grown in our country every year anyway, and it's being grown to feed to animals, to feed to people in this incredibly inefficient food system that we have. And we can simply use that grass to make gas instead. It's a different kind of grass, I should say. It's not like that. It's not like you see out in the countryside that cows are grazing on. Our grass, I was in a field in the summer. It came up to my head and it looked like a weed patch. It was a wonderful mixture of ancient indigenous kind of plants that we just don't see in our industrial agriculture landscape. Brilliant habitats. We just mow it twice a year. Yeah. That's it. That's what I got.
Got it. Another question from down the front here.
Now that the Tories are out and Labour's got the biggest majority, but probably with the smallest proportion of the vote, do you think a more proportional way of actually forming a government is actually warranted?
I thought that was warranted when the Tories kept winning, when Johnson got his 80-seat majority with 40% of the vote. It's been warranted for a long time. And we ran a campaign called Just Vote ahead of this election to encourage people to take part. And we decided amongst ourselves that we would turn our attention to proportional representation next. But just before we do that, we're going to campaign for digital democracy. I think we have a really old-fashioned system of voting. You know, we all have to trudge down to a local community hall somewhere, maybe after work. I don't really know if you know, for the people that do work. But basically, we make it difficult. The Tories made it more difficult with voter ID. You know, we shuffle into a booth. We use a pencil to make a cross in a piece of paper. Everything else in our lives is done on our phones, on apps. Why can't we vote by app? So that's what we're going to campaign for next. I think we can get participation rates up that way, because it is a tragedy, a travesty, really, that participation rates have been falling since the 1960s. And that's not very healthy.
But of course, if you had that system, we'd be looking at a very different result. Somebody said to me the other day, there'd be, under PR, there'd be 96 reform MPs or something of that nature. And I know that's a terrifying thought for you, Dale.
Yeah.
But there would also be potentially fewer Labour. There'd be, might be even more Tories than, there might be whatever. We know that in France at the moment, and we've seen it in Germany, when you get these kind of rainbow coalitions, it becomes, some would say almost impossible. So democratically, it looks better, but in terms of implementation of government, it can be, pretty tricky.
Proportional representation, I mean, ironically, it's how we got Farage, right? This is how he became an MEP.
Yeah.
And he went to Europe to undermine Europe, and he did it because of proportional representation. I think if we knew we had that kind of system, people would vote differently, but I don't know for sure. And then again, if you look at Germany, for example, where they've had coalition governments forever, it's a very stable country, right? Where we tend to flip-flop from one philosophy to another. We're quite volatile in that respect. You look at countries with PR; they're quite stable, but it's not without its risks. There's a lot to take into account.
Okay,
I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon either.
Maybe we could just vote on Twitter, because that's a very honest, decent place to have reasoned debate, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Social media, the den of iniquity that is, Dale.
I mean, Labour already brought in some voting changes, haven't they? 16-year-olds are going to be able to vote at the next election, which is incredible. And I think mandatory registration or automatic registration, voter registration as well, which is incredible. I think they should go further. There should be an app, like the NHS app. Once you put your details in, it knows who you are. And when the time comes, you can simply vote.
Yeah. Okay. Next question comes from wherever the microphone is.
I wanted to raise the elephant in the room of nuclear power. I understand it's nuclear power stations that consume more energy than they ever produce in their lifetime. And the lifetime of a nuclear power station is, to some extent, infinite, but not useful. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about, we're told that nuclear has to be part of the energy mix for the country. We're stuck with nuclear power stations. Is there any way of incorporating them into a bright green future?
It's a good point, and of course it came up this week. I interviewed one of the former heads of an energy corporation. She said nuclear is the only way. She sympathised with the whole kind of wind and solar, but she said nuclear is the only way. You get these smaller nuclear hubs, can't remember the name of them, you'll know, Dale, and they can be made quickly and efficiently. They're clean, and they're the fastest way to get green energy.
Yeah, and this is the narrative of the nuclear industry for the last 50 years, right? That the electricity will be so cheap we don't have to meter it. That was what they first originally said. What we got instead was electricity that's the most expensive that we've ever seen. And no nuclear project in the world has ever come in on time and on budget. And at the moment, Hinkley is about 10 years behind and billions of pounds over budget. I think that Hinkley should be finished because we're so far in. I think Sizewell C shouldn't happen. It doesn't make any sense. It'll take 10 years to build and another 10 years to pay down its carbon debt. And that's if it had planning permission today. That'll take another 10 years. So there's no way that it can help us by 2050. The really chilling statistic above all of this is that by 2050, there'll be a global shortage of uranium. No, we don't make any, we don't mine any in our country. I've seen the graphs. We passed peak uranium several years ago. The world is using more uranium now than is being produced. And so if we build new nuclear power stations anywhere in the world, really, let alone in our country, we're going to find ourselves in an expensive chase for the fuel to run them. Let me do the maths. I'm going to say within a couple of years of them being built, if we start now, they'll barely have been operating before there's an actual global shortage of uranium. And that undermines the idea that nuclear power is reliable and all that kind of stuff, apart from the fact that it's always been said to be cheap. So these mini nukes, the idea is that we proliferate nuclear power around the country with like 50 megawatt nuclear power stations, like something from a submarine engine, but maybe a little bit bigger. Rolls-Royce have come up with the idea. Sounds spiffy. They've been talking about it for 5 to 10 years. They still have not put a price on it. We don't know how much the electricity will cost. And I say it's counterintuitive that when you make things smaller, they get cheaper. I've never seen that work anywhere in the world, in any field of life. Normally, you get economies of scale by making something bigger. Now, they've failed to make nuclear power work at a big scale. I don't believe they can make it work at the very small scale. And I don't think we need a proliferation of nuclear power stations up and down the country. I mean, I just don't.
Okay. I did look up the Steve Baker reference. I was trying to rack my brains as to why he was in the news this week. And because he's no longer an MP, of course, but he said the Tory party needs to elect someone who's in the centre. We don't need mad extremists running our party, said Steve Baker. That's what he said. As my old nan would say, what a dick. Right. Let's get to another question right at the back there.
Thanks. I love how you demolish all the many arguments of flaring nostrils or whoever else. But there's one argument I find harder, and I'd love to hear your response. I campaign, for example, against the steel industry's climate footprint, and most people here haven't heard of that, but they've heard of jobs lost at Port Talbot. And when I say the green economy of the future will drive jobs, it doesn't quite land when a whole community is being affected. So I'd love to know, how do you deal with arguments for those whose jobs and livelihoods are being lost in the old fossil fuel economy as we get rid of it?
I think that was also something that Jeremy Corbyn wrestled with, wasn't it? For that very reason, that nuclear plants and in weaponry terms, that he was often caught in that, I'm against nuclear weapons, but I'm aware that, 20,000 people work in that industry.
Look, I think the steel industry in Talbot is suffering from bigger problems, like, the global oversupply of steel, the problems we have making it economically. Making green steel is something that's possible now. It's being done now in Europe, and you can make it with hydrogen, and converting existing furnaces to use hydrogen or electricity instead of coal is totally feasible. I don't think it's the major cause of Talbot's problems. I think the Indian owners are pulling out. They've got more economic places to make steel, and that's a problem. But big picture, my argument is that we'll have more jobs in the green economy than we have in the brown one. And there'll be very similar jobs. If you look at offshore oil and gas versus offshore wind, we need engineers. We need mechanical engineers, electrical, electronic engineers, and we have them in abundance in the North Sea. We have the skill sets in the existing old industries that are entirely transferable to the new industries, and there'll be more jobs in the green sector than in the brown. It's just a question of shifting people over a period of time.
Okay. Another question. We will try and get through as many as we can here.
Hi. First of all, a couple of cliches. The cleanest energy is the stuff you don't generate. And 80% of the buildings in this country that are going to be here in 2050 have already been built. So we've got horrendously poorly insulated building stock. We have new buildings that are being built to standards that are inadequate. The standards that we do have, there's a huge gap in terms of the actual delivered product with meeting those standards. So there's this performance gap that exists. I wonder, have you got any ideas of how we can address this problem? Because at the moment, I'm not seeing it happening.
So, it's also the cheapest energy that we can make, the stuff that we don't use, not just the cleanest. And it's cliche, but it's true. We build about 100,000 new homes a year, and we've got about 28 million in the ground. So new home standards are important, but they're not as important as the world of retrofit. Having said that, the Tories took away the code for sustainable housing about 10 years ago. The building industry had come together. It was a voluntary code, and they had created the ultimate standard, which was a new home built that basically made all its own energy and had no energy bill. It was a zero carbon home. The industry were ready to build it. Cameron came along as part of his cutting the green crap drive and simply took it away. I've been lobbying Labour to bring it back. It would be easy to bring it back. It exists. It's been well researched and it was ready to go. So that's the answer for new homes. Let's bring back the zero carbon home standard. For our existing homes, we have to have a major program, a retrofit program of energy efficiency. What I was arguing earlier was that we can do that alongside a national program to install solar panels and batteries. We can create energy independent homes. It's a kind of home version of the national picture of being energy independent. We can do it on our rooftops or in our homes up and down the country. And that's what we need to do. It'll cost several £billion. It'll cost many billions of pounds, actually, but it will pay for itself very quickly.
Okay. Next question. We are, again, right at the back.
Hi there. Hi, Dale.
Hi.
Fellow Stroudy here. You've talked a lot about batteries, and I just wanted to ask if you could talk about the ethics, sustainability and waste of batteries in terms of how you sort of see the future with them.
Yeah, for sure. I think, there are issues around lithium, for example, where it comes from, how it's mined. I would say a saving grace of this technology is that it can be reused again and again. There are issues around cobalt. We hear a lot about cobalt, mostly from the fossil fuel industry. Like cobalt mining is a problem in certain parts of Africa where it comes from. But what they don't tell you is that the biggest user of cobalt in the world is the fossil fuel industry, and they've been using it for decades, and they never mentioned it before. We're hearing about it now because it's part of the green economy. I think we can do better. Battery technology is changing as well. I don't think lithium will always be with us. I don't think cobalt will always be with us. It's changing very rapidly. I began the electric highway in 2011. And we were sticking 3 kilowatt chargers on the motorway. There were basically 3-pin sockets on the motorway. Within 10 years, when I sold the highway, we were building 300 kilowatt chargers on the motorway. It was quite incredible. And behind that, the electric cars that were available to us had gone from a range of about 80 miles to 300. And what I'm trying to say is the pace of technology in that 10 years was just incredible, from a standing start, from no electric cars to incredible electric cars and the ability to charge them. And battery technology was the key to that. Actually, mobile phones led to that. The abundance of mobile phones in the world enabled that industry to pivot into making batteries that were fit for electric cars. Right now, electric trucks are being made. They're being rolled off the production line. Buses, of course, are on the road already. And we launched an electric airline last year. It won't have batteries. It'll use hydrogen and fuel cells. So all I'm trying to say is, like, whatever we've got now is imperfect. There's no doubt about it. We can make it better, and we should. But it won't be what we're stuck with for very long.
Okay. Over this side on the right. Yes, sir.
The naysayers hate the country being paved over with solar panels, but do you have a good suggestion or a method as to how the land beneath the panels can be used for food production, either animals or vegetation?
At the moment, the rules for solar panels in our country say that you can't build it on land that's better than a grade 3B. And 3B is the threshold at which and below which you can't grow food. And so it's already being built on marginal land. You don't necessarily know that because certainly under the Tory government, there was a lot of talk about it being a competition between food production and solar panels. That was just bullshit. That's not happening. I mentioned earlier that on our rooftops, we can make a quarter of all of the energy that we need to build between now and 2030. I mean, that's a massive amount, taking up no land, just rooftops that are already being built. And otherwise, it is marginal land. What we do with our solar projects is some people graze sheep in and amongst the panels. Obviously, being vegan, we're not going to do that. We just rewild the land. We let it become a habitat, and that's a nice thing to do.
Next question, please.
Dale, I'm from Tees Valley, and we might have a shift in Parliament, but we've got a Tory combined authority rule in Freeport, and the Freeport seem to be a more powerful thing than Parliament at the moment. The way there's legislation is just totally different within these zones. We've got BP net zero, which is just not going to do what we need to do. That's the thing.
Did you say BP net zero?
BP net
Wow.
zero. Yeah, billions of pound project going on
Wow.
up there.
That's a contradiction in terms.
I was
isn't
about
it?
to say, the BP Net Zero project.
There's greenwash and there's greenwash.
Yeah.
The free ports, they're a strange thing. I think there's an awful lot of money being channeled, public money being channeled into private hands. A bit like the PPE scandal during the pandemic. And I think I hope Labour will take a close look at those and perhaps shut them down, because it's just a gimmick to enrich a few people with public money. I don't see any good coming from it.
Okay. Next question. We are down the front.
Yeah, the technology is brilliant. It's great, and I'm really enjoying hearing it all. But are we just continuing our excessive lifestyle that we should be changing anyway? Like electric cars, those sorts of things?
It's a fair point, actually. I mean, just to go back to what I think of as basics, 80% of our carbon footprint, all of us, comes from three things: energy, transport, and food. How we power our homes, how we travel, and what we eat. And in all of those areas, we need to reduce the waste that we have in each of them, and we need to actually reduce our consumption, and they're different things. Travel less, and when we do travel, for example, travel in a lighter carbon footprint way. And the same principles apply in energy, and they apply in food as well. But the biggest change we can all make is actually to stop eating animals. It simply is the biggest change. And it's how we bring wildlife back to our country as well. If the whole country was plant-based tomorrow, 75% of farmland wouldn't be required. And that's half our entire land mass that we can give back to nature. And the decline of nature in our country is caused just by our diet. Not just, pretty much actually, by intensive agriculture to feed animal products to us in unprecedented amounts. So I agree with you. We do need to live more lightly. But within these three areas, we need to use less, waste less, and source what we do need more sustainably.
Do you think the animal side of it, and again, we touch on this quite a bit on the podcast, kind of takes a back seat to the energy arguments, wind farms, solar panels, etc., electric cars, all of that? But actually, you're incredibly passionate about the food chain issue, industrial farming on breathtaking levels. You said there's three strands, and that is absolutely pivotal, right?
Yeah. That's right. And I've taken to talking about the cow in the room recently. I was on Chris Packham's Nature March in London a couple of weeks ago. And I said to the audience, look, there's a blind spot out here in the world. People that care about the climate, people that care about nature, they've got a blind spot, a collective one. And it's their diet. Because if you eat animal products, you're literally eating nature out of house and home. So I think of it as the cow in the room. I think you're right. I think a lot of people that do care about the climate and do care about wildlife find it hard to accept that they have to stop eating farm animals. But there it is. There's the cow in the room.
Flaming Nostril Nigel would say, yeah, but Dale, we've got teeth that are meant to eat meat.
I'm going to tell him that now he can eat grass.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe Nigel has no teeth. We don't know. Next question comes from wherever we are with the mic. I think we're going in this direction.
I was just wondering, given the state of our political crisis, not only climate change, but also rise of fascism and general disillusionment and polarization, I'm wondering if we need much more radical innovations in our democracy than lowering the voting age and digitalization, and actually empowering citizens' assemblies just feels like the obvious way forward. And I was wondering if you're going to push Labour to actually meaningfully empower citizens' assemblies, so they're not just making recommendations, but they're actually deciding policies that will empower us all. And
that's an interesting question. I don't feel like we have a political crisis at the moment. I think we just solved one. We do have a participation crisis, I would say. Not enough people are voting and that kind of stuff. But from my perspective, we've just got ourselves a government that are going to change everything. And I hope that will actually engage people in politics. Again, we've got a leader that puts the country before party. In my opinion, a man of great integrity. He's here to serve. He's not here for himself. And if you look at the previous handful of Tory leaders, it's been for them a career move, just to tick in the box. I was once Prime Minister of Britain. Rishi Sunak, for example, he didn't have a plan. He didn't have a philosophy, an outlook. He didn't have something that he wanted to do. Keir Starmer has that. Labour have that, and it is the green economy. So I'm super positive about that. Kamala Harris in the US, now standing as the Democratic nominee, I think is a fantastic development. And there's every chance that she'll beat Trump, which I think is really important for the world, right? In France, Macron's gamble with the snap election seems to have paid off, and he's seen off the far-right challenge. So I look out and I think there's no actual political crisis. We can't afford to be complacent or anything like that, but I think that's good. Citizens' assemblies, to come back to your point, I don't know much about them, but I in a way, I think we've just had one. We've had an election. We've made a choice. But I know that it's an imperfect system. Once every 5 years, just to make a simple choice between one of two parties that have maybe they have a dozen-page manifesto or something like that. I know that's imperfect. I don't know enough about citizens' assemblies to say whether, there's something that should be done. I just don't.
Isn't the trouble with, not notionally, obviously, what's wrong with the citizens' assembly? This afternoon or today in London, I think Tommy Robinson, any Tommy Robinson fans in? Yeah, he's organising a march, almost like a citizens, ordinary people standing up against the establishment. I'm not absolutely sure what he stands for or what he's trying to prove. I think we can all take a bit of an educated guess, maybe, but that would be seen as a citizens' uprising. I guess it depends who you have on the assembly, doesn't it? I mean, in a democracy. Sorry, did you want to come back on that?
Just that citizens' assemblies generally they're like jury service kind of thing, that they get a representative proportion. So you're going to have some super right-wing people in the room, you're going to have some super left-wing people in the room. And the point is that they deliberate. And just time and time again, the research has shown that they make much better decisions than our current political
There it is.
system.
Okay. One more question, I think, Anthony. Gentleman over there with the hat, which is lots of people.
So, thank you, Dale.
Narrows it right down, that, doesn't it?
Wouldn't we have a brilliant country if you were in charge? I unfortunately went to see a Lord Glassman presentation last week, a Blue Labour guy, and all he could talk about was the UK turning into a military complex to face into Ukraine, and about Ukraine being a minerals grab. I just wondered what you thought to that, and I just felt very saddened by all the rhetoric that he had to say.
It is very sad. I walked past a newsstand this week and I saw a headline, British general says we've got 3 years to get ready to fight Russia. And I thought, what the is he talking about? This kind of language is so unhelpful. We are not under some imminent existential threat of war with Russia. It's something the Tories tried to talk up in their last days in power and that kind of stuff. It's clearly just designed to scare us and distract us. Can't let it happen.
It's kind of his pet project, as it were. Couple of points. Paul Watson. Tell us about Paul Watson for those who don't know, and why it's important that we raise this.
Yeah, so Paul Watson is an amazing guy. He spent his life protecting marine life, actually. He was a founder or co-founder of Greenpeace, went on to found Sea Shepherd, and currently runs the Captain Paul Watson Foundation, if you don't know him. And he spent a lot of time protecting whales in the Southern Ocean and stuff like that, which is where he is currently come undone because he upset the Japanese whalers so considerably they put out an Interpol red notice for him for terrorism offences, right? This is a man trying to save whale lives. He thought the red notice had gone away. And so he was out on his way to Japan, actually, to confront a newly built whaler that they have. He was on his way, stopped to refuel, I think, in Denmark, and got arrested. So he's now in jail waiting extradition proceedings. If they take him to Japan, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. It's a parallel, a scary parallel, really, with what happened to the Whole Truth 5 last week at Southwark Crown Court, where peaceful protesters are facing just an incredible assault by the law, while the perpetrators of environment crimes, whether it's a whaling company or an oil and gas company, they're getting away scot-free. And there it is, Captain Paul Watson. He needs to be freed.
Okay. We should say that you are signing copies of the book as well. This is the paperback version.
Yeah, we're giving away.
I think this is where I meant to do this manoeuvre, isn't it? It's never done that before. It's quite satisfying, actually.
Do you remember last year, somebody from the audience, they said to me, I hear everything you're saying, Dale, but aren't you just here to flog a book? Do you remember?
Yes.
And I said, actually, I'm here to give them away.
It's indeed, give them away.
And the same is true this year. So we've got a whole bunch of them not here because we clogged the tent up last year. So just round the corner, there's a little marquee. We've got a whole bunch of books to give away. I'll sign them if you want me to. Can chat as well. So don't come and block the front of the stage. I'll see you over there.
There we are. In the meantime, everybody, can we have a big thank you to Dale Vince.
Zero Carbon East Off.